Hi everybody, this is Dave Noel with CodeSquid.ca. We're going to be looking at CSS Grid for beginners and how to make CSS Grid responsive. Now it's a lot easier than you might think. There's still, it's responsive, so there's still quite a bit of little tweaks and stuff that you have to do here and there, but aside from that, it's going to be pretty straightforward. So without further ado, I will go ahead and show you what is on tap. So right away, why don't we just have a little look at what happens to this when we go responsive. So I have the Chrome tools open here, Chrome Dev Tools open. The way you do that is you just do a little right click and you inspect element from the contextual menu. And that'll show you exactly which element that you've selected and all of its properties and stuff in CSS down here. Another cool thing is you can go up here and you can toggle device toolbar, and that will allow you to view this thing in a more reasonable kind of responsive manner. So you can see at which breakpoint these things will kind of start looking really bad. So if we shrink it up, shrink it up, shrink it up, we can see things start looking a little bad. The Buy Now buttons are getting a little painful up here, but this still doesn't look like it's broken until we reach, I don't know, maybe around the 900 pixel mark is about my threshold for bad design. So we're looking at this now, and the lines are going double line where they shouldn't be, and things they're starting to look really cramped, kind of difficult to read. So at 900 pixels, we'll throw in a little media query. So we say at media, and you've seen a lot of different media queries out there. Everyone who teaches media queries, they say, then you have to say only screen. You don't need all that. Like most modern browsers know what you're talking about when you say at media. You're not going to view this on any other kind of device in most cases. So we can just say at media and then max width 900 pixels. Now, the reason why we do max width instead of min width is you can shrink all the way down to 900 pixels and then this will take over. So it's just an easy way. Don't mix up your max and mins because you're going to get really confused really fast. You want to do min widths if you're going from like a mobile first perspective, but in my experience, most design now, like design's pretty formulaic, and most design now that you come across is going to be mobile first anyway. That's why everyone is starting to incorporate these modular designs and everything. So just keep that in mind. Don't mix up your max widths and min widths. Just stick to a common pattern and go from there. So right off the bat, we want to say that this grid, we don't necessarily need the grid anymore. We just need the elements to be, I guess, 100% width, because it's only 3 up. So let's see what that looks like. You just say grid display block, and then your items line up nicely vertically. See? Just like you would expect. Just ordinary kind of responsive layout. So now what we want to do is we want to specify what our actual items are doing. Let's go down here and we can say, we want to say the 2-up items as well, because you can see there's no padding below these 2-up items, so it's starting to look a little cramped down there. And these ones are also cramped because they're butting up against one another. We want to keep that nice kind of grid spacing that we had before. So we'll add a margin of 20 pixels below. And these 2-up items, remember up here, the 2-up items, we made it a display grid so that we could alternate between the text and image sides depending on where we were in the DOM. So now we can say 2-up item, we'll just say display block as well. So we're turning that grid into a block as well. And when we look at it down below, everything's kind of nicely spaced. The image is nice and big, and then we have the text nice and big, and it's kind of floating on top of one another instead of, and we also got rid of the side-to-side action too. So if we stretch this out, you can see it looks fine, looks fine, looks fine, and then we're starting to lose a lot of the image there, and then it goes bump, and now we can see the full image again on top. Okay? Alrighty, so now we have a few more little tweaks that we need to do. I noticed that the 2-up images, they're starting to look a little strange when you get down to a smaller size. Like, we end up sort of truncating it again. I think that's because we have a minimum height on these. So what we want to do is we just want to say that the minimum height is now going to be 0 so that it can shrink up all the way if it wants to. So the 2-up item image is a min height 0 and the background is none. Maybe we don't want to do background none. Let's just say the min height is 0. And now when we shrink it up, you can see those images size really nicely, and you have the full image there now that you can see. So it kind of crops itself for a little bit, and then boom, then you have the full image on a responsive format, so you can actually see the full image as you get smaller. Okay, so now we need to actually look at other breakpoints because it's starting to look a little weird when we get down to a smaller point. So let's say this doesn't look too bad. We're coming up on like iPad size. This here is your average iPad size, 768, 764, 768, whatever. So that still looks okay. But once we get down to about 630, things start to look a little tight again. The text is starting to look really big, and it doesn't need to be that big. Okay, so now let's have a look at the H1 tag. You can see the H1 tag at the top is getting just out of control. So let's change the H1 tag under 630. So let's do another media query at media max width 630. And we want to say the H1 tag H1, and let's just guess at a value here. I'm going to do a really interesting trick that you guys can try at home. Font size. Whenever you have something going pretty much to the edge of your screen, you can do something interesting with the font sizes. You can call it, let's say 7 VW. Okay? So now it's nice and small. It looks pretty much the same as it did before, but now we have this added bonus. When we get down to 630, it'll actually resize depending on the size of your screen. Isn't that cool? Look at that. It's like a dynamic title sizing depending on the size of your screen. Okay, so now that we have that going on, we're down at 630 here. Why don't we look at the 2-up item text. Once we get down to 630, it's starting to look like maybe we want this to match this up here because it's starting to take up a similar amount of space. So let's make this a text-aligned center. Oh, look down here. Remember, we have all of these elements were absolutely positioned before, so we're going to have to take that into account. So what we want to do is we want to change the absolute position on all of those items. So it would be the stock and the price and the medium and the text button. We want to make all of those static. And now we can see it all lines up really nicely. But something went a little weird with the button. So we can throw in a little correction for the button itself. Now, I'll just put in the correction and I'll explain what's happening here. If we remove this, you can see because the button itself is a flex element, it means that everything inside is treated as a flex element. They're treated like, items within a flex element. They aren't block level anymore, so you can't, or they aren't inline anymore, so you can't specify things like text align to get the by now to center itself. You have to do something called justify content. It essentially does the same thing, but it'll do it for block level elements and everything in here as well. It's just a little feature of Flex and Grid. So if you want your stuff to be centered, you have to say justify content center. And then boom, see? Now the cool thing is now the button takes up like the full width. which is fine. I don't really mind that from a responsive perspective. And we want to put a little bit of margin on the top and bottom because the way it looked before, it looked a little too tight. So let's put a little margin on there, and we're targeting the 2 up button in particular. The one up here is absolutely fine the way it is. Now that we have all of the stuff static instead of absolutely positioned, it's static positioned, it's now looking at the padding for the item that we set earlier. So if we look at, let's just look at the item here. 2 up item text is, the padding bottom is 240. So we want to take that down to just 40 to make it match the rest of it. So we say 2 up item text, there. Now you can see everything shrinks up quite nicely. Look at that. All right, so now I think we can do one more breakpoint. It's all looking quite nice. On like, this would be like a phablet size, or you know, whatever Samsung foldable madness is going on right now. So we can shrink this down even further, and when we get down to about 480, this is the mobile phone territory right here, and it is looking way too big. The text is way too big. We want to be able to fit like a product on a screen here, and it's just not working nicely. So why don't we come up with a 480 media query? Okay, and in here we want to make the fonts smaller. Now remember, we did something cool with the fonts all the way up here. We specified that the font, the root font size is 22, and then we said everything else is put in M's. So that means that it's a certain percentage larger than the base font size. So that's how we did it. So now what we can do, which is really interesting, is we can say HTML and body. So we do it the exact same way as we did before, and we say font size 14 instead of 22. And look, everything gets quite nicely done here. And I'm also noticing that we have like quite a bit of padding on either side now. The padding for the page wrap is 40 pixels, so that's 40 pixels on either side. Once you start getting down to smaller screen real estates, you're running into an issue where 40 pixels on each side, that's like 100 pixels that you're losing. So things are going to start to get cramped when we get down even smaller. So what we're going to want to do is we look at page wrap, and we're just going to set the padding to 15. There. Now you can see everything is coming together. This looks more like a mobile interface. Okay? So now let's see what this looks like at its extreme. We'll collapse it down all the way to 320. You're not going to get too much below 320. And everything is readable. It lines up nicely, and nothing is broken. Look at that. Beautiful. So that, my friends, is how you do responsive with grid. Use the grid whenever you want to, right? And when you no longer need the grid, when just normal items on their own will do, then just get rid of the grid. You know, you're not married to the layout. The grid is a tool to help you when you're trying to make things line up in a meaningful way on large displays or even on small displays. But once its utility runs out, then you don't need it anymore. Look at that. No more grid, and the content is free to flow as large as it needs to based on the text, but every item is as large as it needs to be. And then you can shrink it up and you can play with your widths and whatnot and your font sizes, and everything just sort of comes together really nicely. So that about wraps it up for this amazing tutorial into CSS Grid, how to use it, what you would use it for, and how to make it responsive. I leave comments open on these videos, so if you guys want me to cover something else, just let me know. I'm open to suggestions. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye.